The first cities that we know of were not in Mesopotamia. The first cities that we know of, about 6,000 years ago, are on the territory of what's now Ukraine, south-central Ukraine, between Kyiv and Odesa. And those cities, those large gatherings of 10,000, maybe up to 100,000 people, were destroyed sometime around the war, which may be the war more than any other that decided the shape of the world, which was when the first people who managed to use the horse on a large scale for warfare, probably the same people who spoke Indo-European languages, conquered what's now Ukraine, and brought themselves and their horses and their culture into the rest of Europe, into Anatolia, and into northern India, bringing with them the languages that are spoken by half of the population of the world today, the Indo-European languages. That's the territory of Ukraine changing the world. Where our story of Western civilization starts is with ancient Greece. But ancient Greece only existed in the form that we know it, in that celebrated form of Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, Aeschylus, Euripides. It only existed because of a synthesis across the Black Sea with the Scythians, with the people who inhabited the northern coast of the Black Sea, what's now southern Ukraine. The Scythians arrived about 2,500 years ago, and their synthesis with the Greeks is what made our civilization possible. If you read carefully the works of Aeschylus or Euripides, you realize that their most important work is actually about the coast of the Black Sea and the lands that we now think of as Ukraine. And there's good reason for this, because from the point of view of the ancient world, the great foe, the great Eastern world, was Persia. And the reason why the Scythians were famous to the Greeks was because they had defeated the Persians decisively in a one-on-one war. And that war made that Scythian-Greek synthesis possible, and thereby all of Western civilization possible. The role of the Scythians in Ukraine is scarcely remembered. We remember the Greeks, but we don't remember the Scythians. And the bits and pieces of Scythian civilization are hidden under things that we consider myths, like the Amazons. But of course, the Scythians actually did have mounted female archers. That's actually a true fact confirmed by Ukrainian archaeologists. The Greeks give way to the Romans. How did the Romans fall? The Romans fall in a war which I think people in the 21st century should be recalling. It's when the Huns defeat the Goths in the 4th century AD now. The Goths are a Germanic people that inhabit most of what's now Ukraine, some of the Carpathian Basin. The Goths are defeated by the Huns in the 4th century. And then the Huns take the resources of the Goths and destroy the Roman Empire. If you're the European Union, that's something which is worth thinking about, I would say, right? The great Roman Empire, which is the model for essentially all European political thinking for the last 1,500 years, is destroyed because of a conflict in Ukraine, where a power from the east destroys the power in Ukraine, breaks it up, and that instability, plus a new coalition of the invader and the invaders, destroys the empire, which is your political paradigm. 1,000 years ago, the Vikings pick up the pieces of that Gothic Germanic civilization, learn those stories, and bring those stories with them when they found Kyiv around the year, when they take over Kyiv and make it a power around 1,000 years ago. Their great ruler was Sviatoslav, who destroyed the Khazars and who defeated the Byzantines in the Balkans and fought wars over a scale of 7,000 kilometers, which is quite extraordinary. 100 years ago, or let's say in the last 100 years, Ukraine has also been the center of world or continental geopolitics. The First World War, although we don't think of this from a Western perspective, was largely about control of Ukraine. From the point of view of the Austro-Hungarians and the Germans who were thinking of the Kornkama, the endless cornucopia of Ukrainian food, it was largely about Ukraine. The Holodomor, Stalin's first 5-year plan, and the famine in Ukraine was about control of Ukrainian resources. The Second World War was about control of Ukrainian resources and Ukrainian human potential. The central axiom of Hitler's strategic thinking was control of Ukrainian territory. That is the cause of the Second World War. It's also where the Second World War was decided. And again, if you're European and you don't want to think all the way back to the Goths and the Huns, thinking back to the 1940s or the 1930s should be enough. The axis of the Europe that exists today, it was created by a war which was about Ukraine, and in which the right side won up to a point. The Soviet Union as it existed depended upon control of Ukraine. I think historians looking back 500 years from now will probably see the war of 2022 in the context of the Second and First World Wars as a part of a European struggle for Ukraine. What's different now, of course, than 6,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago is that there is a Ukrainian political nation and a Ukrainian state. There are people who are inheritors of this very broad and rich history, and there is a state with which other states can cooperate, which in some sense makes things relatively easy. Once you know that wars fought over Ukraine are disproportionately important for future centuries or even millennia, and there's a state to cooperate with, then the conclusion that you draw should be relatively simple. Thanks.